This Amateur Radio Roundtable is brought to you in part by ICOM America. Hello to everyone out there. Tonight is Tuesday, March 27th, I think. Is that right, Walter? Walter's in the studio with me tonight. He's watching the chat room, so y'all be good. March the 27th, boy, March is almost over. Don't know where time's flying to so fast. If you're new to the show, and if you're listening on shortwave, by the way, we're on world famous international shortwave station WBCQ on 5130 kilohertz tonight. And if you're listening, send us an email and let us know where you are and give us a signal report. You can send it to tom@w5kub.com. And if you've got an internet around close by, you can join the show and watch the show. You can watch the video and you can join the chat room. Just go to w5kub.com. For anybody new that's joined us on video tonight in the chat room, I want to say hello and welcome to you. And I would like to encourage everyone to click on the link at the top. There's a link that says Facebook. We have over 6,500 people in our Facebook group now. And it's a good place to just follow the show and post ham radio pictures and discussions and things like that. So please join our Facebook group there. Boy, we got a lot of exciting things coming up. I just want to mention to you one thing that Walter and I are working on. Tomorrow, FedEx is going to bring me a remote station, and I'm going to be installing a remote station here on a dedicated radio. I've tried mobile in the truck, and I get so much ignition noise and stuff, and it hadn't been great. But hey, with with Remote Shack, we're going to have HF going to Dayton. We're going to have a 10-hour drive, and we're going to be talking to people that entire 10 hours. And with the Remote Shack, we're getting a little external microphone with the touch tone on it in a little box. It plugs into your cell phone, and that's your connection back. And boy, I'm really excited about hooking this thing up tomorrow. We'll talk more about it later. All right, so hey, tonight, let's see, Katie must be in a snowstorm tonight. I haven't heard from her. Hope she's doing okay. But tonight, we've got Rich Mollison with us, W2VU. And Rich is the editor of CQ Magazine. And I'm going to bring Rich into the show now, if I can figure out how to do this. Here we go. I'm going to bring Rich into the show, and we're going to talk a little about CQ Magazine coming up here in, I guess, April. Hey, Rich, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Tom, and glad to be with you again. And bring everybody up to date on what's coming up in the April issue of CQ.
All right. Well, hey, first let me ask you, how's your weather up there? You guys been getting some nasty weather. Are you doing okay?
We're doing fine here. We had 4 nor'easters in 3 weeks, which did some pretty heavy tree damage and a lot of power outages. And we thankfully did pretty well here, although if you go just 1 or 2 towns over from us, they had we had 8 inches of snow in the last one, and they had 24, about 3 miles away from us. So it's a very localized heavy snows, kind of a strange storm. But right now we've got no snow left on the ground right here. But again, if you go a town over, they've still got lots of snow on the ground. And out in Hicksville, where CQ's offices are, there's still snow piles and parking lots and things like that.
All right. Well, I'm glad you got heat and lights up there and everything. But hey, you got ham radio in case of an emergency. So we know if you get snowed in, you can still talk to us. Tell us about CQ. What's coming up this month?
Okay. Well, for April, first of all, I usually don't talk about what our editorials are about, but this month I did want to mention it, especially considering what you've got coming up on the rest of the show here, which is on this topic. We are taking a stand strongly supporting the ARRL's proposal for expanded HF privileges for technicians. It's something whose time has come, and we're very much in favor of it. Our cover story this month is taking us back into winter a little bit with a look at Winter Field Day QRP style by our QRP editor, Scott Rout, KA8SMA. and he talks about his experiences operating outside in January in Wisconsin. It's different. Our main feature for the April issue is, as always, the results of the single sideband weekend of the 2017 CQ Worldwide DX contest. We had record participation this year with over 8,600 logs submitted, and in those 8,600 logs were over 3.5 million QSOs. So contesting is alive and well. And a sneak preview for May, the CW weekend had very much similar record participation. We also have an interesting perspective from a non-contester, VK4QS, I'm sorry, down in Australia, on the benefits to a non-contester of operating in the CQ Worldwide DX contest and all the benefits that he found from getting on during the contest. We have 2 CQ reviews this month. The Elecraft KPA 1500 solid-state amplifier is reviewed by Bob Loker, W9KNI, and WB6NOA, Gordon West, takes a first look at the Ciegu X5105 portable HF transceiver that's being distributed in the U.S. by MFJ. Of course, it's April, so we have Professor Heiseluft, who has a sneak preview of what he's calling the mother of all awards, called Worked All Rivers and Tributaries. So you get to find out about that. Among our columns, K0NEB's kit building column talks about a crystal tester that can also double as a frequency readout for a rig that doesn't have a digital display. And he also explains a bit about his Dremel tool for getting into small places and things like that. Excellent tool to have in your workshop. Our learning curve column is focused on power this month and all about power supplies, difference between analog and switching power supplies and what the different parameters mean in the specs that you see. In our medium frequency and low frequency operating column, we've got a profile of a station that is operating 630 meters from a condo. So if you think you don't have space for an antenna for 630 meters and that's all that's keeping you from filing your paperwork and getting a station on the air, be sure to take a look at this column and you'll get an idea that you don't need huge amounts of space for huge antennas for 630 meters. And finally, in our always fascinating propagation column, Thomas Hood, NW7US, writes about NASA detecting solar flare pulses at both the sun and the Earth. And it's a quick look at some of the highlights of our April issue. The digital edition should be out on Zinio as of beginning of next week, and the print issue should be following in the mail soon after that. And anybody who's interested in subscribing, you can just go to our website, www.cq-amateur-radio.com, and click on the subscribe link. We've got our Spring Fever subscription special going on right now, so you can get a bargain as well. And that's what's coming up for April.
All right. Well, I just wanted to tell everybody that if you don't have CQ Magazine, you might win CQ Magazine, because on our trip to Hamvention, we're going to be giving away some subscriptions to CQ, digital CQ Magazine, and that is cool. So maybe we'll have a few lucky winners here and get them hooked on CQ.
I hope so.
Well, Rich, thank you so much for coming on tonight and telling us about next week. And I think you had a chance before the show to listen to Riley and Bruce there talk about. We're going to be talking about licensing, I think, and youth and all that stuff. You probably heard more about it than I did pre-show. So stick around if you want to. Watch the show on the internet if you want to, or you can stick around on Skype. I'll leave you on. You might want to mute your mic so the cat doesn't run across the mic.
Well, he took off for a little while, but yeah. I'll stick around for a little while. This is
Okay.
a subject that has been of interest to me, ever since I was a young ham. So definitely I'll stick around, and if I can figure out how to mute the microphone here,
I think just,
jump in
just
later.
down at the bottom, your Skype, you already see a couple little colored in circles.
Yeah, I found it. Okay, so I'll be quiet now.
Okay, very good. Okay, 73 Rich, thanks. Stick around and join the show.
Okay.
All right, guys. Well, hey, next we're going to bring in Riley. And Riley has someone here he wants to introduce and talk about. Riley, tell us what this segment's about and what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay. Well, a lot of us are concerned, and more people should be concerned about our demographics. When I started going around to amateur events all over the country in 1999 and 2000, I noticed that there were so few young people. Usually we had them stand up and state their name and age. And when I retired, it was the same situation. And I know that the whole population is aging, but I'm just very concerned that we're not getting young people. And some people are afraid to draw in a lot of young people. They think that it's dumbing down the hobby. But I just want to pose this hypothetical question. Suppose if there is a dumbing down, suppose that dumbing down started when we made the question pool so massive that it encouraged people to memorize the answers rather than learn the answer. Just think about that, because there's an awful lot of memorization tools out there today, from flashcards to little booklets that have only the correct answer, so forth and so on. But anyway, we've got to do something to draw younger people into the hobby. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see amateur events looking like meetings at retirement homes. Now, I ran into Bruce sort of by accident. Bruce, usually when you hear the word PowerPoint, if you're like me, you want to go the other direction. I hate PowerPoints generally, but you won't feel that way about Bruce's. It's excellent, and he has done a wonderful study on entry-level licensing and question pools and license classes and so forth, and it's really interested. He's an active avid CW operator. Bruce has been licensed since '68. He's a member of the Royal Society of Great Britain, the Radio Club of America, and the Friends of CW and CW Ops, and very active in amateur radio. And he spent a lot of time in this, and it's a very enlightened study of this. And I won't detract from it anymore. I'll just let Bruce take it away. And I think this will be one PowerPoint that you will enjoy. So it's all yours, Bruce.
All right, thank you, Riley, and Tom. Thank you for having me on. Let me share my my screen here and bring this up. Here we go. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, I sure can.
All right. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, please stop me as we go. And I hope I don't put everybody to sleep with this. I'm Bruce, K1BG, and as Riley mentioned, I've done quite a bit of research on entry-level licensing in the United States, and we'll talk a little bit about this. Just a little bit about my background. I had a wonderful experience getting into amateur radio. I got my novice originally as a 14-year-old, and many of the friends I made as a teenager in amateur radio are still very good friends today. We've stuck with this hobby throughout our entire lives, and it's affected me positively in so many ways. Anyway, I've always been involved in Elmering, particularly when I was young. There was a lot of youth in the hobby, and that dropped off quite dramatically, and we'll talk about that and the reasons why I think that's happened. The last formal class I taught was in 1989, but I've done quite a bit of recent Elmering activities, both Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. We just completed something with the local Neshoba Valley Amateur Radio Club called Thinking Day on the Air, which is a Girl Scouts activity. I'm a level 1 instructor for CW Academy. which is a great program for teaching people Morse code. And I've known since probably the late 70s that we really have a young people problem. And this has been apparent for quite some time now. And we'll talk a little bit about the reasons why I think that's happening. So here we go. Early licensing. Before 1912 was the Dark Ages. The first recognized radio organization in the country was the Junior Wireless Club of New York City. It had 5 founding members. The average age was 12 years old. There was a lot of youth in the early days of amateur radio. By the way, the Junior Wireless Club still exists. It became the Radio Club of America, and it's still in existence and still going strong today. After the Titanic disaster, there was a general recognition that there had to be a separation between amateur operators, commercial operators, and military operators. And so amateurs were licensed. The amateur first grade was the first amateur license. You had to pass a test. It was administered by the Department of Commerce, and the operator had to show that he was capable of the proper adjustment and operation of the apparatus he wished to operate, okay? And this is pretty much specifically taken out of the original government documents. You had to know something about radio laws and regulations, and you had to be able to show you could send and receive Morse code at 5 words per minute. But the test was, and this quote comes out of some ARRL documentation in the 40s, the test was exceedingly simple. It was very simple. It was so simple that if you lived far enough away from a government examiner, you could send a letter by mail that certified that you knew the material, and they would send you a license back in the mail. It was really very simple. Little unlicensed stations were allowed. I think they were more tolerated. The Department of Commerce was primarily interested in what you did across state lines, and they were interested in interference issues. Government stations were all naval stations, so they were along the coast. Commercial stations were all Marconi stations trying to communicate with ships at sea. They were along the coast. So as long as you were inland and as long as you weren't bothering anybody, nobody really cared. That, by the way, was allowed through the early 20s. In 1919, after the First World War, for a reason which I can't explain, the code requirement went to 10 words per minute. And I find little documentation talking about this. It's just that the rules changed after the war. Now, I want to reiterate here that through 1912 till about 1919, the requirements were 5 words per minute and an exceedingly simple test. And there appeared to be a lot of youth attracted to the hobby. It was a youth-oriented hobby. We'll talk more about this later. Fast forward now, Radioactive 1927, which again was followed a worldwide meeting regarding licensing radio. A few small changes. Amateur first grade was renamed amateur class. Second grade was renamed temporary amateur grade. By the way, these morphed into the eventually, well, we'll talk more about that later, eventually the general and conditional class licenses. Go ahead. No, I heard some feedback here. In 1932, again, there was a slight structuring change. The amateur class became the Class B. The temporary amateur grade became the Class C license. 10 words per minute Morse. And by this time, the questions about how to safely operate the apparatus that you intended to put on the air, because equipment was getting technically more complicated, this changed to 10 essay questions that you had to pass in order to get a Class B license. And this is when the ARRL published their first license manual, was in 1932. So I don't have a copy of the first one, but I have a copy of several of the very early license manuals. 1936, code speed goes up to 13 words per minute. So you can see the requirements creeping a little bit as we go. In 1938, there's an interesting, it seems to us, editorial in QST, where the editors lament that in the 12-year period from 1926 to 1938, the average age of the ARRL member has gone up by 8 years in a 12-year period. And this sounds an awful lot like what happened later in amateur radio. And they attribute this to the growing complexity and cost of getting into amateur radio. Complexity being complexity of the equipment, but also complexity of the test. And they complain about, or they don't really complain, they discuss the increasing minimum age of amateur licensees, and how just a few years ago there were many, many youth in the hobby, and now in the entire country there's only a handful of operators who are under 15 years old. So clearly during the 30s there was a period where, as the complexity in the hobby increased, the number of young people in the hobby apparently decreased. The FCC also further simplified the Class B license in the late 30s. In the ARRL license manuals, the questions in the license manual, and maybe I should say the subjects, went from 161 questions down to 68 questions. And the exams went from 10 essay to 40, mostly multiple choice questions. They still asked you to draw a couple of schematics. So there was still a technical aspect where you had to draw schematics, but the old 10-question essay exam went away and a multiple choice exam came in. Then in the late 40s, we have really the huge bombshell. FCC Notice of Proposed Rulemaking number 9295. This was a general revamping of amateur radio, but they proposed something that was really revolutionary, and that was the novice license. Basically, NPRM 9295 states, paragraph 7C, creation of initial interest on the part of the novice, particularly youth. And by the way, the text in red, I'm highlighting this for reasons we'll talk about later. Particularly youth, through the establishment of a short-term, non-renewable beginner's license of comparatively easy attainment. They don't say what comparatively easy is, but I can only assume it's comparatively easy to the other license classes at the time, okay? But again, keep in mind that the FCC's focus on this was youth, and it was a short-term, non-renewable, comparatively easy attainment entry-level license. There was a lot of discussion over this. Various members, various people in industry chimed in. The Equipment Manufacturers of America organization had their position. From what I've read in magazines at the time, the ARRL Board of Directors was staunchly against this. But the ARRL president, George Bailey, was very in favor of this. So there was a lot of contention at the league. And in fact, in the league statement to the FCC, where they eventually came around and supported the novice license, they did document the fact that they considered this to be a lowering of standards, okay? And while they weren't necessarily against the lowering of standards, they did absolutely make their point. I call this the dumbing down comment of the time. And again, this is the dawn of the novice license. Now, I don't know everyone here. Rich, I don't know if you're still on, Tom, Riley, but I got into amateur radio through the novice license, and it was I was in the 60s. We'll talk more about how the novice changed, but there's general agreement that this novice license was really great for getting youth into the hobby, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute.
That's how I got in too.
So the novice license, go ahead.
I also came in as a novice in 1970.
So the NPRM was in 1949. There was a lot of discussion through 1950. July 1st, 1951, the novice license comes in. Sorry, wrong button. It had limited privileges. It was 1 year, non-renewable, distinctive call signs, 5-word per minute Morse requirement, a 20 question multiple choice exam, and the first ARRL license manual. And I don't know if I'm still on camera or not, but the first ARRL license manual.
Yep.
Yeah,
hold it up
28
again. Hold it up again. There you go.
Yeah, 28 questions. By the way, for 1951, this was the entire license manual for all the classes of amateur license. It had 28 simple subjects.
You know, Bruce, you mentioned the
subjects.
novice. You mentioned the novice license 1 year, 1 year non-renewable, and I think all of us here on this show knew if we didn't upgrade by then, we wouldn't have a ham license.
Correct. Just to show you, I hand these out when I give this talk to radio clubs. I hand this out. This is a photocopy of the pages. And so, you know, the cover of the license manual is in red, but this is basically it. It's 1 page front and back and about half of another page. So it's really very simple. The original test had the original the 28 question subjects. Ohm's law was not one of those 28 question subjects. It was very, very simple. And the result of this was it was a huge success. There were youth that got involved immediately. And in my research, I've interviewed people who were Class B licensees before the novice came along, and I've interviewed people who got the novice license very early on, 1951, 1952. There was a real change in the people amateur radio was attracting, a much more younger crowd. By the way, in my presentation, if you see things in red, the things in red are really geared towards the objectives of the NPRM, the 1 year non-renewable, 5-word per minute, 20 question simple exam. My comments in blue are basically my own personal opinions. You know, I feel it was a huge success. Everybody I've spoken to felt it was a huge success, but I can't really give you hard numbers. I've done some research that leads me to believe that large numbers of youth did come in. By the way, the distinctive call sign is not in red. The N in the call sign was something that the ARRL made a request to the FCC for. That was the ARRL's idea. I also believe that having that N in the call sign had an effect on novice licensees. We'll talk more about that later. At the same time, the technician license was brought in. And I don't want to really dwell on this, but I just want to say that the technician license was never intended to be an entry-level license. It was designed for experimenters who would push technology at the higher frequencies. There was a 5-word per minute Morse code requirement because there was an international Morse code requirement. But technician class licensees generally were a little bit different at the time. They either wanted to experiment, or they got their technician license simply because they didn't want to deal with the Morse code. And it was typically, but not always, typically you got your technician license and there was little advancement. You typically stayed a technician class licensee. One of the other things that happened with this same rulemaking is that the old Class B licenses became the general class license. The old Class C licenses became the conditional class license. So if you live greater than, I think, 75 miles from an FCC office, when you took the general class license by mail, they called it a conditional class license. And if you wanted to advance to a higher class license after that, you had to take the general again in front of an FCC examiner. So anyway, here we are in 1951. The novice license gets off to a running start. So we look at the question subjects in the early years. I'm not going to call them the question pool because that has a little bit different connotation. We'll talk about that later. But in 1950, there were 69 questions in the ARL license manual for the Class B license. There were 28 very simple questions in the ARL license manual for the novice license. And this pretty much remained the same through the mid 60s. There were a few questions added. We talked, Ohm's law was one, but the level of the questions was really very basic level questions. And by the way, if anybody, if you're interested, I've got all these old license manuals and I've scanned them. I can supply, what those questions actually look like, the format. Some people call this period the golden age of amateur radio. I'm not 100% sure I agree with that per se. I think the golden age of amateur radio is the age that you get interested in it and get excited about it. But nevertheless, it was a wonderful time to be a ham radio operator. So things stayed pretty simple. 34 questions right up through the mid 60s, and then something came along in the mid 60s called incentive licensing, and along with it, the number of questions in the number of subjects in the license manual went from 34 to 50, and the novice license went from 1 to 2 years. And I suspect there was a trade-off there. In other words, when there were a number of novices that were not getting their general class licenses, and after a year they would upgrade to technician, and that was never the intent of the novice license. And I spoke, one of the people I spoke with from the FCC at the time, and I don't remember who it was, said there was a general acknowledgement that maybe 1 year wasn't enough, and that it should go to 2 years. I know personally, I got my novice license in 1968. I took the 50 question exam, and 1 year was not enough for me. It took me 6 months just to be able to scrape together enough money to get a station to put on the air. And it took me about another 7 or 8 months from that point to get my general class license. So, but I suspect that the additional questions on the test were a reflection of the novice going from 1 to 2 years, but that's speculation on my part. Now, before we talk about this, I should make note, the way these questions came about in the old license manuals, and I don't know if you can see these here or not.
Yeah, we can see them.
But the way these questions came about was that the FCC would write the questions, and they were public information. The ARRL and presumably others, because I know I do have some other study manuals, and the questions were virtually identical. The ARRL would then take the questions and answer them in a longhand format and publish them as license manuals. And the statement in the ARRL license manual was that If you study the question and understand the answer, that you should be able to pass the FCC exam. And someone I spoke to at the FCC, Riley, I don't know if it was if it was you or if it was one of the other retired people I spoke with, said, yeah, there was kind of a nod and a wink, and the FCC would take the ARRL license manual and they would come up with 20 questions out of the number of subjects that were written in the license manual. And I know mine, there was a question on mine that asked, how do you prevent against electrical shock? And I think everyone got that question, and one of the answers was always to, answer B or whatever it was in the multiple choice exam was to take out double indemnity life insurance. And so that's the way the license manual came about. 1973, there was a complete rewrite of the questions. I'm not sure why. I suspect it had to do with novices getting VFO privileges. 1973 was also the year that novices were allowed VFOs, but I don't know if there's a connection there or not. That would be speculation. So now we start going to what I consider to be the declining years. 1976 was a real watershed year in my opinion, and it's permanently changed what I like to call the culture of amateur radio. The FCC changed the format of the questions that they printed that went into the license manual. They stopped printing the questions altogether. What they started doing was having a very broad syllabus of subjects that would be on the test, but with nothing specific. Okay, the FCC did not. There were no subjects printed from 1976 to 1984, which is why I have this jagged line. It was just a syllabus of different things that would be on the exam. In 1976, the FCC also dropped the N from the call sign. Now, me personally, I couldn't wait. I felt like I was branded. I couldn't wait to get that N out of my call sign. For me, this was one of the major reasons I wanted to upgrade from a novice class to a general class license. 1976 was also the peak of the CB craze, okay? And I don't know how much of either FCC thinking or ARRL thinking went into the changes that they made, but clearly C.W. McCall and his big hit song in January of 1976 certainly had an impact on popular culture, okay? Technology was also coming into play. The ARRL found that they could save a bundle of money by moving to a larger print format. And so instead of publishing the old license manual, and again, I don't know what you're seeing here now, but instead of publishing the old license manual, the ARRL now went to a document called Tune in the World with Ham Radio. And while the old license manual contained all of the questions and answers for all of the class licenses, plus all of Part 97 at the back, Tune in the World was a longhand answer to the syllabus that the FCC was publishing. And this was geared towards the novice only. And it was chock full of lots of information with no test questions at the end. And in my opinion, again, in my personal experience, this is when I started seeing the eye roll by young people. In other words, this is when the study material started to become something that looked more like a school book rather than a few pages in a license manual. One of the questions I ask when I give this talk at radio clubs is I ask how many people in the room were licensed 1975 or before, and usually about half of the people in the room raise their hands, and I ask them how many of you were 18 years of younger, and virtually every hand stays up. Now again, you would kind of expect that because it's 40 years on now. So if somebody had been 60 when they got their license, they'd have to be 102 now, okay? So you would expect that to be a younger crowd. But I also asked the question, how many of you in the room got your license 1976 or later? And about half of the hands, again, the other half of the hands come up. And I asked those people, how many of you were 18 years of age or younger? And very few hands stay up. So in my opinion, we started losing youth long before cell phones, long before personal computers, long before the internet. I think we started losing youth when we went to these larger format study materials and the larger sets of subjects that were contained in them. Oh yeah, we talked about Tune in the World. And again, my opinion in the lower right corner, youth interest starts to fall off dramatically in the late 70s. Excuse me. All right, more on the declining years. In 1978, the novice now becomes 5 years renewable. So if you remember those things I had in red with the original NPRM, okay, the limited time period, the non-renewable license, the comparatively easy exams, these things one by one are starting to go away. And these are all eroding the interest, and again, in my belief, the interest that youth have in getting that entry-level license. And specifically, when the FCC put out the NPRM, it was specifically targeted towards youth. One of the interesting things about this period where the FCC published the syllabus is an enterprising gentleman by the name of Dick Bash, and I don't remember his call sign. He started publishing a study guide called The Final Exam. Dick Bash noticed that failure rates at FCC exams skyrocketed. And offhand, I don't know what the rate is, but I do know that that Dick Bash has this published, and I'll later research this. But Dick Bash started sending people to the FCC offices on the days they were giving the exams and interviewing people on the way out. And he wrote his study guide based on the actual questions that were on the exam. He was widely scorned in the amateur community. What I find interesting is that while he did publish the exact exam questions, the answers were much like the old ARL license manual. In other words, they were a longhand explanation of what you needed to know in order to pick the right multiple choice answer that was on the exam. 1984, we went to the first question pools. The volunteer examiners came in at that time, I believe, even though you were allowed still to have a general class licensee administer the novice exam. The first question pool, which actually printed the questions and the answers, had 200 questions based on 67 subjects. And so what I graph out here are the subjects and not the questions. And that's the flat line just to the right of the jagged line is the 67 subjects. So what they did, for instance, Ohm's law was a single subject in the old license manual. It could now be 4, 5, 6. You don't know how many questions in the question pool. So I'm trying to compare apples to apples, even though it's becoming more difficult to do that. VECs now give the higher class tests. In 1985, the novice test goes from 20 to 30 questions. Not sure why that happened, but again, when you do that, then the question pool goes up accordingly. At some point, it became law, and it is in Part 97 that there will be 10 questions in the pool for every question that's on the exam. So if you look at this, if the test goes from 20 to 30 questions, the pool can goes from 200 to 300 questions in the pool. In 1988, the ARRL petitions novice enhancement. This allows novices 10-meter privileges. And by the way, when this happened, there was a corresponding increase in the number of questions in the pool and the difficulty in the test. I believe that when it comes to youth, all of these things, novice enhancement included, it had the opposite of the desired effect. The thought was if you offer the novices more privileges, you'll get more people interested in the novice license. My suspicion is that as the license got more difficult, it drove more young people away. Also at this time, my experience as well, Elmering and classes dwindled. I know when I was growing up, every amateur radio club offered a novice class, almost without exception. There were lots of people that were willing to Elmer. My opinion, my observation is that classes have dwindled. You go to the typical radio club these days, you ask them about classes, and they say, well, we have volunteer examiners who give exams. Very few clubs, again, in the research that I'm doing, appear to have technician class licenses these days. I believe this also started in the 80s when things got more difficult. I'll tell you, I don't know if the camera is on me again. This is the first tune in the world after novice enhancement. And interestingly enough, I gave the last formal class in amateur radio I taught was during this time. This was significantly more complex and cumbersome than the novice class license of the early 70s. What's even more interesting is that the instructor's guide that went along with this was almost as significant as the actual study material itself. And I know for me personally, by this time I had a young family and I had a career, it became increasingly difficult to teach classes, to teach entry-level classes. And that's why while I still teach Morse code today, I'm not involved in any license classes at this point. So now we talk about the declining years, new question pools, questions added. In 1991, the no-code technician came along. I believe for adults who, it's funny, youth are very interested in the code. Adults, not as much. Thinking Day on the Air, the most popular activities have to do with Morse code, believe it or not. And so I believe the no-code technician became the de facto entry-level license simply because we had a focus on adults coming into the hobby and not youth coming into the hobby. In 1992, the novice exam jumps to 35 questions. The pool jumps to 350 questions. So it's, again, getting more and more complex. 1993, the FCC stopped specifying subjects that the question pool will be based on. So in my chart here, everything after 1993 is a guesstimate, but it's pretty close. Generally, there was I think 3.5 or so questions in the pool for every subject that was specified before that, and that's kind of what this graph shows. 1997, the VECs are allowed. The VECs only give the novice test, so you can no longer take the test at a neighbor's kitchen table or in your classroom after school. You have to go to a VEC. In 1998, there's a multitude of restructuring proposals, which we're going to talk about. The FCC the ARRL, I think, caught wind that the FCC was talking about restructuring, reducing the number of classes of license. The ARRL made their own proposals to restructure in order to try to head that off. And we'll talk a little bit about this. In September QST, there were 3 articles that were dedicated towards restructuring. Rick Palm, K1CE, wrote an article called Licensing Restructuring for the Future. And he quotes in this that in the last 6 years, the average age of the ARL member has gone up by 4 years. Well, this sounds an awful lot like what was going on back in the 30s. As the testing got more difficult, the average age of the ARL member is going up. And again, it's like history repeating itself. 90% of new licensees are technicians, only 3% are novice, and probably the other 7% are higher class licenses. The original concept of the novice license as a temporary learner's permit was a good one in its day. This is a quote. Today's novice test is a far cry from the old simple 20-question exam of yesteryear. Another quote in the article. The novice question pool alone occupies more pages than did the entire license manual for all questions of all classes of license in 1962. And I've got all of those manuals sitting here in my office. Quote, we can't hold the attention of young people long enough to bring them in through the existing novice class. So there was a recognition, okay, in QST that back in 1998, that we can't hold the attention of young people, okay, through the novice class that had morphed into the novice class that existed in the late 90s. Now, you would have thought that one of the conclusions in this article, after reading all of these quotes, was that we would go ahead and try to go back to something that worked in the past. The conclusion of the article is it's time to say goodbye to the novice license. And I think with that, we kind of ended our chances to go back to something that was proven to work, a simpler license. So here we go. The whole history from beginning to end. And again, these are based on the subjects, right? In 2000, the novice class is eliminated. The technician class becomes the entry-level license. You can get a technician class license having never been on the air, having done nothing but study the 350 to 425 questions that are in the question pool, and you can immediately go out and buy a transceiver and put a kilowatt of power on 6 meters. That is the technician class license, the privileges, and that's the current entry-level license. There were new question pools in 2000, 2002, 2006, 2010, 2014. These morph and change over time. What's interesting is that even though there's only 35 questions on the current technician license, there's 426 questions in the question pool. Nobody can explain to me, and I've asked why there's an additional 76 questions in the pool when only 350 are required. So that's where we are today. I'll just give you this graph very quickly. Subjects versus the pool. If you look at the old license exam that existed until 1976, you had roughly 50 questions through the mid 70s. I think there was 49 in 1976. when we come back from that period when there was no actual subjects printed, all of a sudden we immediately go to 200 questions in the pool. So if you're just looking at what the individual questions look like, it's a huge number. And just to show you what I'm talking about, this is the current license manual for the technician class license. When you show this to a youth who doesn't have school books that are this big for an entire year's worth of study in a particular subject, they look at this and the eyes roll. And again, I've seen this recently. So compare that to the couple of pages that were in this document, and you'll understand, at least in my opinion, why we're not attracting youth to amateur radio. What worked and what didn't, again, this is all personal opinion. Comparatively easy tests. I think in 1949, when the guys at the FCC dreamt up the novice license, I think there were enough of them that were around 30 years earlier in 1919 to remember that a comparatively easy test meant that you would get youth in the hobby. If you remember, in 1912, it was a 5-word per minute test that was really very simple. In 1949, the NPRM comes out, the FCC goes back to a 5-word per minute code test and a comparatively easy written exam, okay? I think the comparatively easy exam works for getting youth in the hobby. The short-term license clearly worked, okay? If you got a novice license and were passionate about it the way that I was scared to death I wasn't going to be able to pass that general class license, okay? Now, if you had asked me to take the general class license as the first license I would have taken, I probably wouldn't be a ham today. And I think if I was a youth of today, I don't think I would be taking the current technician class license. I think getting the novice license and getting on the air built the passion and the desire in me to take this to the next step. I don't think that's happening with the technician class license. You see a tremendous number of people get the license, never get on the air with it, or the ones that do are very disappointed in what they find with the current license, which, by the way, is why I also support the proposal to give technicians limited HF privileges. The fact that it was non-renewable, short term was 1 year and later 2 years. Non-renewable meant that you just couldn't go out and either take the novice test again, or you couldn't go out and renew that license again. The distinctive call sign was an incentive to advance. Again, I felt it was an incentive for me. Other people I've spoken to have told me the same thing. And again, the simple, non-threatening study materials. This is the 21st century. We really need to think about study materials for the 21st century. Most youth these days are taking exams using personal devices, whether they're iPads or laptops, and we really have to question whether youth is going to be interested in traditional written material. But in any event, whatever it is, it's got to be very simple. And these things didn't work. The more complex tests didn't work in the 1930s, and they certainly didn't work in the 80s and 90s. The 10-year license, I think for higher class licensees, the 10-year license is fine. I think for the entry-level license, the goal is to get you interested, to offer you a taste. The people that are passionate will move up and become that trained pool of technicians that the country desperately needs. I think that the 10-year license is really a non-incentive to advancing through the ranks. The same thing with the renewable license. I think the short-term non-renewable license for entry class worked. The call sign distinction, I think, again, was something that worked, and study materials that resemble school books don't work. So anyway, I think that's about it, and I think my time is about over. So I'm sure there are questions. Oh, final thoughts. Sorry, I jumped ahead. This novice license idea by the FCC was really visionary. It was focused on youth. It was short term. It was non-renewable. It was comparatively easy attainment. And again, in my opinion, which is why it's in blue, is each of these visionary items was watered down or eliminated. The original success of the novice license was impacted until it became meaningless as an entry-level license, and this is particularly true for youth. And with that, I'll send it back.
All right, we'll let Riley and Rich jump in here. You guys, go, if you want to discuss it, I'll check for questions in the chat room, and if there's a question, I'll shout it out to you.
Okay, I just have a couple of comments. This presentation raises the very important question of what is the balance in question pools between one that's a turnoff at worst and one at best encourages memorization rather than actually learning the answer and enticing people into amateur radio. And the youth today learn differently than we did. They're smarter than we are, and anybody that tells me they aren't is probably somebody that called a kid to straighten out a computer problem for them. They're smarter and they think differently. We need them in the hobby. There's inventors and scientists out there, and I know that it's often said, well, we can expose them to amateur radio, and maybe later in life they'll get into amateur radio. Why don't we get them now? We need these young people now. And the equipment that we had, the vintage equipment, was more complex to operate. The equipment that we have now is complex, but it's simpler to operate. And they don't need to know all of this stuff to keep from doing damage to themselves or to the bands. In fact, with a lot of these things now, you get a warning signal when you're out of band. And maybe this is unfortunate, but you can't even smoke a lot of the stuff these days. It has self-protective circuits. And I say that tongue-in-cheek, of course.
You know, Riley, man, for us to make a contact, we had to work hard. I mean, nowadays you can turn that radio on and talk about anywhere you want to.
You can. You make hundreds of contacts a day if you want to.
Yeah.
You should try my radio then. I had a good deal of trouble over the weekend on 20 meters talking to people in the WPX contest. Did better on 40.
I did too.
I've got. I've found that Bruce's analysis very interesting. Particularly going back to 1935 when there was concern about youth. It seems that concern about youth in the hobby is as old as the hobby itself. It goes back to 1935 as he's documented. I remember in the early 1980s when I started getting involved with amateur radio organizationally, one of the big concern was that we aren't getting enough youth. And now 25, 30 years later, we still have the same concern, but who are the people who are concerned? The youth we weren't getting 30 years ago are now the ones who are concerned that who are there, are now concerned that we're not getting enough young people. You know, I've had the privilege of being a judge on the Young Ham of the Year award that Newsline does for at least 20 years now. And we have some great young people in the hobby. And may not have lots of big numbers. I don't think we really ever had huge numbers. I know when I was in high school, and about the same time that I got into ham radio. We were the nerds. We were a distinct minority of people. Where there were not huge numbers of kids in my high school who were hams. There were about a half a dozen of us, and we're part of this bulge of the general society of the baby boom, and you can't discount the fact that there are fewer young people out there at a given time and more at other times. So I share the concern about continuing to get young people into the hobby, but this is something that's been a concern, as Bruce points out, since 1935. And different things have to be done to help attract young people. The Young Ham of the Year Award has been one of them. A couple of things that I disagree with Bruce rather strongly on is the limited term non-renewable license. I cannot think of any other hobby that throws you out after a certain period of time if you don't achieve a certain level of activity or achievement within the hobby. Imagine if you are into bird watching, and if you haven't seen 150 different species in the first 2 years, you can't watch birds anymore. Or if you're into hiking, well, if you haven't hiked 2 mountains more than 14,000 feet in 2 years, well, you can't hike anymore. This is the only hobby that I've ever heard of that ever said, if you don't achieve a certain level of proficiency in a certain limited period of time, you can't play here anymore. So I disagree with Bruce on that. Other things that he has, I agree with and feel that he's got some very good points there about the difficulty levels and the number of questions that can be very daunting.
Well, Rich, do you have any insight as to why the technician pool is so many questions, so many more questions than it has to be?
No. I've had relatively little informative contact with the people on the question pool committee. And it's, that whole thing has become kind of muddied over the years. In the early days of the volunteer examiner program, the commission had very specific subject areas that had to be covered, and that there had to be X number of questions on this topic and X number of questions on this topic. And that seems to have been muddied somewhat. The composition of the exams is no longer dictated by the FCC, just a very broad general scope of the exam, and it's up to the volunteer examiner coordinators and the question pool committee to determine the composition of the exams to a much greater extent than early on in the VE program.
I think a lot of us probably look at this as a technical field, and like someone in the chat room stated, it's really not a technical hobby anymore. You have these people that will advertise a ham class, and I guess the tech is the entry-level class now, but you have these classes that people go out and recruit and bring people in. They cram for 6 hours, and they take the test at the end of the day, and then they say, okay, I'm a ham now. What kind of radio do I need? Well, back when we started back in the 60s, I didn't live in a large city. I lived out in rural areas, little small towns. We didn't have repeaters back then anywhere. There may have been some repeaters in some larger cities, but it seemed like that's what everybody goes for now, the VHF, the repeaters, and maybe they're content on getting a license there. I would love to see something like an entry-level license, maybe like a novice license. Renew it. That's okay with me. And give them just a little smidget, like we had on CW. Give them a little smidget of each band to get in there and operate. And once they do, then they'll decide if they want to, I guess, expand that, and upgrade.
Yeah, good enticement.
Well, I think that's what the ARRL is proposing in this, in their what I'll call a technician enhancement proposal. I think that's exactly what they're proposing, and I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, well, it'll surely get people a little bit more experience, maybe get them excited. I don't get real excited on VHF, UHF myself. I've got 2-meter rigs, 440 rigs. I do get on a 220 repeater a little bit, but I'm an HF guy. But that's the way I grew up, And
Well, I am too,
yeah.
but when you look at it, the kid with a cell phone today that has Voxer and WhatsApp applications on it can talk all over the country and maybe the world by pressing a button on that cell phone as if it were a two-way radio. So repeaters to a lot of kids, the young people today, are boring at best.
Yeah,
And
and I'm
conversation.
I'm going to
Boring.
probably
Sorry.
I'm going to probably add a little new to old. I talk about the remote shack. I mean, hey, I'm going to use a cell phone to get back to my ham station here when I'm mobile. So, there is some new technology in here we have to understand, and that we use.
Well, I think back when the no-code tech came in, and even when the novice license was phased out, 2-meter repeaters, VHF, UHF repeaters were fun places to be. You could meet a lot of people. You met people in your local radio club. Back in the day, it was exciting to order a pizza through an auto patch. You try doing that today, people kind of laugh at you. That's what everybody's ordering a pizza through their cell phone. Nobody even has landline phones in their homes anymore. Everybody's got access to radios. And if the entry-level product is not as good as what you get on a cell phone, people are not going to buy it. And I'm afraid that's really what's happening.
Well, here's a question. Here's a question in the chat room. Here's a question that said, so how do we fix it? If it's boring, if that's the problem, what can we do to make it exciting? Anybody?
What we're doing is, it's a question of marketing. And what we don't market well is the magic of ham radio.
Yes.
Yes, if you have a certain app on your phone, you can call somebody in Bangladesh. Okay, but you have to know somebody in Bangladesh to call them, because you can't just randomly call some number in Bangladesh and expect to have a conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
We offer the ability to talk to people you don't already know all over the world, and with an expectation that, yes, they will talk back. They won't hang up on you. They'll be there. They want to talk too. But we also, there's the magic. Radio really shouldn't work, I mean, we string up a wire in our backyards or maybe a bigger antenna, but we send some electrons out into that piece of wire, and they go out into the air, and they magically bounce off the ionosphere and come back someplace else, and we can talk to people. Your cell phone, as one of our columnists pointed out in his May column, has several $1 billion worth of infrastructure behind it when you make a phone call or when you bring up something on the internet. There's no magic on a cell phone. There's no magic on the internet. Ham radio is magic, and that's what we need to be marketing. As Bruce mentioned before, when he does events with kids, and I've had the exact same experience. They think Morse code is incredible. They love it.
Yeah.
And you can't get them to put down the key if they're sending something. It's a secret language, and we market it as, oh, it's very difficult. No, it's magical.
Yeah, it's not that bad. Hey, here's a question, and Bruce, I think you've got some of this data from the FCC. You and I talked about it earlier. I ran some polls on my site, and I didn't get the exact same data that the FCC has. But there's a question from Jim in here. Does anyone have actual age data of hams at various years? Again, something factual versus conjective.
The answer is it's hard. Up until 1996 or 1997, the FCC actually, as part of your record, you could go to the FCC site and look at the date of birth of the ham, right? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
But that doesn't tell you when somebody got licensed. So let me tell you something that I started doing. I probably put 20 or 30 hours into this. I got my old ARRL sweepstakes logs from the 90s. And if you remember in sweepstakes, there's something in the exchange called a check where you give the year you were first licensed. Okay. Yeah. And I actually took my ARRL sweepstakes logs from the 90s and my QRZ data disk that I have from 1996 that has the date of births on it. And I actually started comparing with the checks that were, and again, this you're talking 25 years ago, more than 20 years ago, the checks from the stations in the 30s and in the 40s and the 50s, and comparing when they were first licensed, to their birth date kind of thing. And I found just what I expected to be true. In other words, age dropped dramatically in the 50s, starting 52, 53, 54. The checks got noticeably lower, and then the people first licensed after the mid 70s started going up again. Okay, now it would take a big study in order to do this because it's very painstaking and time consuming. But I keep looking into this and I keep trying to find data that proves me wrong. And every time I turn a stone over, or I peel another layer off the onion, I find more data that substantiates my feelings. So
I know what it was. I was talking to you about. My poll had percentages of extra, percentages of general, and so forth, and it didn't match the FCC data at all. Now you've got FCC data on that. Can you tell us a little about how many people or what percentage have what licenses today?
Yeah, and again, I don't have it right in front of me, but over 50% nationally, over 50% of the licenses are currently technician class licensees. Okay, and the ARRL actually has on their website a page where they update this weekly. Okay, each class of license and the numbers and all that kind of thing. And I suspect technician class licensees are a much lower percentage of the numbers you found in the poll. Am I right?
Yeah, my poll showed. Well, I don't have it in front of me, but it didn't show near that many techs.
And I suspect, and again, this is my own personal opinion. A lot of people get technician licenses for whatever reason. They're obviously interested in amateur radio, but they don't pursue it after getting the license.
That's probably a very good point, because my poll is on a website, and people that visit the page can take that poll. And I think what you're saying is probably right. Many technicians aren't even active anymore. They're not interested anymore. They've got a license, and so nobody's voting that they've got tech license. It was something like 70% were extra. I mean, it was a high number on extra, and very low number on tech. So there must be a lot of tech licenses out there that aren't being used or are not active.
So again. Sorry, go ahead, Rich.
I was going to say, I think this is one of the major challenges that we have to deal with today, more than the licensing numbers, is getting those people who have gotten their licenses active and involved in the amateur community. People get licenses for various reasons, whether it's for working with public service and emergency communications, or being a weather spotter, or any other number of possibilities, and then they don't use them. Part of it is in their heads as to what they want to do or what they don't, and part of it is in the clubs. They, around me, there are a lot of clubs that do technician class license classes, and they teach the course, they give people the license and the exam, the people get their license, and then they're let loose. The clubs should be actively involved in drawing them in, giving them free first-year membership, getting them involved in activities, getting them hooked up with people who do different things. And there's a lot more that needs to be done. You know, we're getting 30,000 new people a year into this hobby. That's not bad. That's 100,000 people in the last 3 years. But are they getting on the air? Are they getting active? And that's the big question mark. If you look at ARRL membership numbers, if you look at our circulation numbers, they hold steady, basically. We're not drawing those new people into the community in the numbers that we need to. And that is a major challenge for us as a community to go out there and help new hams get active and get involved. To me, that is as important a challenge as continuing to bring additional new people into the hobby. It doesn't help to bring them in if they're not going to get active once they have a license.
Yeah, well, maybe there are preppers out there. I mean, hey, people know ham radio is for an emergency. Ron was making a comment here. Someone saw his ID the other day and said, "What is that?" And he says, "I'm a ham radio operator." And the guy kind of laughed. He says, "Do people still do that?" So I guess there's a lot of people that don't know ham radio is still out there and very active. You get these preppers that go out and they want to get a license just for an emergency, and then an emergency never comes.
I got the
And
same.
if the emergency does come, they don't know what to do with their radios because they've never used them before.
Tom,
Yes.
I got the same question in the Staples store the other day. At the counter there was printing something, and she said, that's a ham radio call sign. I didn't know people still did that anymore.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But anyway, those are anecdotal. I'm going to have to sign out here. I have to get up early in the morning.
Yeah. Well, we need to.
Bruce, thank you. Very
Thank you,
interesting.
Riley.
We'll be talking more.
Yeah, we need to wrap this up too. It's getting late in our schedule here. I think it's a good discussion tonight. I don't know if we saved the world or came up with the solution, but the history was good, showing how the FCC and the testing evolved over time. And I'm going to always be partial back to what I call the olden days. My intent on this show was to talk about the olden days, and that's why I like getting Martin, Jew on here. We talk about the 60s and so forth, and how bad we really had it. Just like when you talk to your grandfather, he says, "I had to walk to school. It was uphill both ways." Well, that's kind of how it was for us back when we were being hams. It wasn't easy back then, guys. I want to thank Bruce and Rich and Riley for coming on tonight and bringing the subject. I think there was a lot of discussion in the chat room about it. So we got a lot of people thinking about it.
Well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. And I'll look forward to getting feedback from people. I'm sure I'll hear from them.
Well, okay,
Thanks.
guys. Thank you very much. Riley, go to bed. Hey, on the East Coast, well, all three of you guys on the Eastern time?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, but it's getting late for you guys. Go to bed. Go to bed. See you later, guys. Thanks, 73.
All right. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys. Well, hey, let's see what's going on here. Hey, Walter's here with me in the shack tonight. Walter, why don't you come over here and join us, man? You can come over here and join us in the studio over here. Walter's been watching the chat room for us. Let me move over a little bit. Didn't have to kick anybody out tonight, he said. So let's see. Let me see, Walter. Let's see. Walter, I'll get you over there. We've got too many keyboards here. Here, Walter, you can have this. Let's see. You can have this keyboard right here.
After our afternoon today, we're not hanging here real long.
Walter and I are tired, man. Let me tell you, we went out and worked on antennas all day today. And we're trying to, guys, as I mentioned, as I mentioned, we're trying to put in remote shack, and I wanted basically a multi-band antenna that's going to be connected to it all the time. And we were out there making some adjustments on the 80, 40, and the 20, and we tried to add 17, but it caused so much issues with 20. We finally took the 17 back off here, but hey, the remote shack's going to be here tomorrow, and we got things ready. Everybody stand by just a second. There's something here I need to want to do. I'll be right back.
Communicate with the best. Communicating has never been so much fun than with ICOM. From D-Star to SDR, ICOM uses the most advanced technology in their radios. The SDR you've asked for is here. ICOM's new 7610 is a high-performance RMDR with the ability to pick out the faintest of signals, even in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The new ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling, software-defined radio that will change the world's definition of an SDR transceiver. It has an independent dual receiver with 110 dB RMDR. Communicate with a new D-Star communications device. Easy to operate, the ID31A Plus is available in silver, red, or gold. With it, you have worldwide digital communications. You can share pictures and text messages. It's waterproof, compact, lightweight, and tough. Visit www.icomamerica.com/amateur for more information on ICOM radios.
All right, so hey, anyway, we're back now. So yeah, we're going to be hooking up a remote shack tomorrow, and guys, this is going to be exciting. Boy, putting the mobile rig in, it was a disaster.
Yep.
Worked all that, did the welding, made the antenna mounts, ran the cabling, and man, the 7300 picks up so much ignition noise out of that Chevy Silverado. I couldn't get that down. I had a Yaesu 991 in there. I tried maybe 6 months ago, and I don't recall it picking up all the ignition noise, but it picked up something like a fuel pump noise, and boy, it was even terrible. So, hey, we're going to have a nice, clean, loud signal. We're going to be mobile on any band, and we're going to have a delta loop 90 feet up in the air, and here at the house. We're just going to
There you go.
We're going to see how this works. So, hey, we're going to be streaming to Dayton, 10-hour stream. You can watch us drive up there in a few weeks, and we'll also have the HF rig on. You can talk to us. You can watch us talk to you. You can hear you can see
That's it.
You can see us talking to you on HF. How's that?
That's right.
But the nice thing about the little remote shack is it's just a little box about so big that interfaces to the phone line, interfaces to my radio, and it's pretty simple. You can just from a telephone, you can control it with touch tones on your phone, and you can change the frequency. If you want to change the frequency, you just hit star 14250 star, and that puts in 14250, and you're on 14250, and it'll talk back to you, and it'll say 14250. So that's kind of cool. But you can do anything your radio does, basically. You can turn filters on or off, or noise blankers, or all those things. Now, instead of using the phone and having to hit the little touch tones on the phone, I'm going to get with it it's an option, and it's a little microphone and a little box about the size of a cigarette box, a cigarette package. And what that does, that plugs into your phone. But you don't have to touch your phone to key the transmitter up. You just press the button and you talk just like it's a mobile rig, and you let off the button and you listen. And you got a keypad on there, touch tone pad on your mic and everything, and it's just really cool. In fact, when I go for my daily walk around a block, I could take that microphone, plug it into my cell phone, and I could work HF as I'm walking around the block out here, guys, when I walk my mile every day. So that's exciting. We're going to be doing that. We're going to be doing that real soon. KM4 QBC bedtime. That's Jeff. That's Jeff Powell over in Tuckasegee, North Carolina. A friend of mine over in Tuckasegee. Jeff, KM4 QBC bedtime for him. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining, Jeff. I think Kathy's going to be in North Carolina in about a week. I'm not going. I'm going to stay here and
right.
work on things and
Are you going
do
to
the show.
send her with the thing so you can?
I don't know. I don't know. I'll get over there some.
She can report in.
She likes to go over there and get away from it all, you know, in North
understand.
Carolina, in the mountains, in the Smoky Mountains, you know. So hey guys, hey, let me just tell you once again, we're going to have about 60 prizes, maybe more. We got some really good ones. I think DX Engineering contacted me today. I think a couple of prizes, if I'm not mistaken, are those really neat new antenna analyzers, VLAs or something. I don't know.
Whatever they're called, those are nice.
They've given several of those. So I think we've got a lot of prizes, about 60 prizes. But I'll just say again, for those that just tuned in, we're putting aside one prize here to help us raise money. This trip is very, very expensive to put on a webcast. We do the webcast for you. We bring ham radio to you. We don't buy or sell anything. It's totally for you. And we're going to put this one prize aside, and for every $10 you donate, we'll put your name in a special drawing for this prize right here. Or this is mine. You're not getting this one, but you'll get a brand new one from Comet. So you know, if you give, if you donate $30, you get 3 tickets. $40, 4 tickets. And hey, let me tell you this: if you'll donate $100, I'll give you 11 tickets instead of 10.
There
That's
you
a
go.
deal, isn't it?
That is.
But hey, check out the donate button on the website at the top up there, donate, and it has all the information about this. We'll announce this prize on Sunday at noon. You do not have to be present to win it. If we call your name, you don't have to claim it. You win it just for helping support our trip. But all the other prizes are free. There's no donation required. And if you can't donate, don't donate. We understand. All right. Hey, guys, it's 9:30. We did a lot tonight. I think we had a good presentation tonight. I'm going to do this. I'm going to turn Hangout on just for 5 or 10 minutes max, and then I'm out of here. Walter and I are out of here. We got to get some sleep because we've got to hook up a remote
We got to
shack
set up
tomorrow.
a station tomorrow when
So
it gets here.
I'm going to bring up Hangout. If somebody will post a link for Hangout in the thing there, I imagine Jeff or somebody do it, but you can do it, Walter. And
Let's see if
you
I know
can
how to
get
do
it.
this. Where's Glenn when you need him?
That keyboard works right there.
Which one?
That one. This
don't know.
mouse right here.
I don't know what I'd
and
do
this
with it.
This keyboard here.
All right, that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Where's Glenn?
We got four mouses here. Okay. So I'm gonna bring up Hangout. And let's see if we can get into Hangout. Did you guys notice Walter's shirt is glowing again? What we have a real.
I don't know
tough time
what's
with you. Look
this
at
is a
this.
standard white shirt with this thing.
Look at this. I mean, you know.
I'm stealthy. That's
I mean,
what it is.
You know, maybe you just need to eat a little bit more because we're seeing through you tonight.
Not according to my wife.
Yeah, let's see. Hangout. Let's go to Hangout here. Let's see who's in there. Might not be anybody. It says we're the first ones there. Okay.
But if we're the only ones there, it's time to check out.
Yeah, we're going to check out real quick. Look at here. Well, hey, look, we got some new people in here. Hey, maybe not too new. I see Ken there.
There's
Ken. See, Ken fools me because Ken fools me. Let me bring it up. Here we go. Ken fools me because what he does is he uses an ID. It's called Chris. So that's what fools me. We got a Douglas in there. We got Chris in there. We got William in there. There's Roy.
There's Roy. Hey, Roy.
There's my guitar player buddy Roy. Who's William? William? Who's William?
There's Wild Bill.
There's Bill down there on the end, and there's Jim. Jim made it in here. Hey,
Shoveling Bill. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
So hey, let me try to get that.
We're gonna be out in Noah's Ark tomorrow.
Yeah, it's going to be.
Are you really?
Yeah, we're going to start getting about 3 inches tonight, man.
Oh Lord.
Looks like we're getting quite a few here on Hangout tonight. There's another Bill. Oh boy, we got 3 Bills in here tonight.
Oh Lord.
Bill, let's see, Bill with the glasses. No, not you know. We all wear glasses.
That's right.
We all wear glasses. There you go.
Weren't we just talking about that in the aging population of ham radio?
There we go. The Bill with the hat on. Bill, let me bring him. No, that's the wrong Bill.
That's wrong Bill.
That Bill right there. How you doing, Bill?
I'm doing great tonight. I wanted to ask Riley a question, but he had to go to sleep, so I guess I'll have to send him a snail mail message. But otherwise, I'm doing fine. It's a very good presentation.
Well, cool. Hey, where are you, Bill? What's your call?
Whiskey 4 Echo Whiskey Hotel. I'm in Burnsville, North Carolina.
North Carolina, okay. All right.
You can ask a question. We'll make up some answer.
Yeah, we'll get it. We'll get you an answer.
No, I wanted to ask
Well, he
Charlie if he thought that ham operators were, for practical purposes, a reserve corps for the military during the last century. I think the reason a lot of the reason that we're losing younger people is that there's no distinction, no cachet or special status to being a ham anymore.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, very, very possible.
I don't know if anybody knows the answers to all this stuff. It's just a changing world there, man. Just a changing world. One of these days, your computer you buy, it'll have a ham radio built into it, and you just hook an antenna to it, and that's just the way things are going here. All right, let's see who we got in here. Who else? Boy, we got a full house tonight. Boy, we got Roy.
Yeah, we do have a full house tonight.
Mike, how many we got? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, we got a full house tonight there. All right, well, yeah, you're really loud. You're really, really loud, dear. Okay, very
Loud
good.
and clear.
You're coming in 40 over S9 here, as you doing HF here, Ken. Oh, look at there, Douglas. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Douglas has got four cameras in there? How'd he get that?
Douglas, he came up a couple times here for sure, but that's a different Douglas now.
There's Doug. You got,
That's the same guy.
Is that the same one?
is that this?
Wait a minute.
Mine just
Oh, wait a minute. He looks different in that picture. See that right there?
Yeah.
He got a headband on in the other picture.
He may have that explosive helmet he wears.
Now look at Jim here at that nice Collins equipment in the background, man. Don't you like that?
You gotta like that.
Man, I tell you, when I was in the military, I loved working at those Collins, those KW2s and stuff, and I always wanted one, but I never got me one. Look at there, Jim's got some KWM2 stuff here, or maybe
Those are darn good radios. We used that. What was it? 1976 to 1979, while we were doing the surveys to the approaches of the Suez Canal. That was the only way that we made phone calls home, was through one of them.
Yeah. Well,
I
they're
used
nice
to pay
radios.
WM2A at Da Nang. I ran the Navy Mars station there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
back on up here.
That's what we had at every military operation around the world, I guess. And I'm sure. I mean, it was a very good radio back then. I'm sure it's still standard. It's still probably still a great radio today. I don't know exactly how some of the new stuff might stand up against it with DSP and filters and all that kind of stuff. It might have some advantages, but I still love the.
It might
Collins stuff.
might lack a little there, but it still would certainly be serviceable.
Yeah, I always wanted to get me one of those Collins amps, one that sit on the floor. Is that
The 30L ones?
Is that the 30L one? I think I always wanted.
Yeah, the 30L ones there, and what was it? I think
Everybody?
You're talking about the 30S one.
Is it the 30S one? Yeah.
30th one.
Oh yeah. Well, you had the 30L one and the 30S one. I'm not sure which one it was. What I'm saying.
What was it? 516 F something or other there for the power. That's all I remember.
I don't know what that is you're talking
Yeah,
about.
516F2. The 30L one is a 1
the 30L ones there. And, what was it? I think
Let's see. Somebody's
got
some feedback coming back to us from the show. Not sure who that was.
Now, who's somebody showing you a
Let's
training
see.
manual there?
Training manual there. Let's see, who is it? That is that's William. Another William. Another Bill. Hello, William. William, that just held up the training manual. How you doing?
Going.
Oh, I'm not hearing you.
Uh-oh.
I thought he said hello.
I thought
Hello. I did. Well, I didn't mind mine. I said hello.
No.
Hey, so
Yeah, Mark. We weren't talking to you, Mark.
We got a lot of audio looping going on, folks.
That is probably why William is not coming back to us, because he's probably hearing us late or something.
He's got the volume up or something.
Yeah. Wow, this is a full house tonight, guys. It's interesting. glad everybody's taking interest in it. What's that behind? Oh, look at there. Look behind Doug there. He's got, I don't know what he's got. Going. Oh, look at there. He's got, looks like, is that Doug? Is that Wheelock back here? I can't, it looks like it. It's a little blurry. Okay.
Oh,
All right. Let's see. Bill.
I can keep up with all this.
Bill. Boy, we got 4 bills in here tonight. We got 4 bills in here tonight. All right, guys. Look. Hey, it's 9:40. I got to get out of here. I haven't had dinner yet, and man, I mean, I'd like to stay longer with all this many people in the chat room, in the Hangout. But you guys stay in here and talk with each other, and we'll see you next week sometime. And hey, we'll be posting on our Facebook group tomorrow and the next day about the remote shack, and we might be looking for some people to talk to. If you want to talk to us, we'll post the frequencies. We're out there. So, okay, guys. Good night to everybody, and we'll see you later.
Very
Thanks,
good.
Tom.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Thanks, Tom. Very good show tonight, Tom.
Well, thank you, guitar player.
You got to play for us some night.
Yeah. All right, 73, everybody.
73. Good night.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So, hey guys, we're through. The show's over with. Walter and I are gonna run. See you at 73. Good night.
Good night.
Glad you were with us tonight. 73s.